Hi guys, welcome back. This is Professor Hank, and in this video we're going to continue our discussion on the LISP programming language, and we're going to have a lesson on arrays in LISP. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So an array is a lot like what you're used to from other programming languages, right? An array is an object that's going to have multiple elements. Each of those elements can be accessed using subscripts, and the subscripts are numbered as you're used to. First element's got 0, second element's got 1, third element's got 2, etc. Okay, so these are arrays. This is when you think about array, we're thinking about arrays. So this is as opposed to lists. Arrays, depending on what you're using or what you're trying to do with Lisp, may be easier to use than a list. They both have their pros and cons, but the purpose of this video is to talk about how arrays work and give you some examples in Lisp. Okay, so here's the things that I want to show you. I want to show you how to define an array, and to do that we're going to have to use a Lisp function called makeArray, and I'll show you how to do that. I want to show you how to access the array elements, and in order to do that we're going to have to use the aref function. I want to show you how to iteratively process an array using dotimes. So dotimes is a repetition structure, or is a manifestation of a repetition structure in Lisp. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So basically, how can we step through the array one element at a time, starting at element 0 through n-1. I'm going to show you how to pass an array to a function. It's surprise, surprise, spoiler alert, it's going to be just like you pass anything else to a function. I want to show you how to recursively process an array. I want to show you how to initialize an array using the initial contents modifier. So if you remember in languages like C++, they have that initialization list. Well, initial contents is similar, right? It serves kind of the same purpose in Lisp. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, first things first, let's go ahead and define an array, right? So in order to define an array, we're going to have to use the makeArray function, okay? Now, the makeArray function is going to take as an argument a list, right? And so what goes inside of this list is going to be the number of dimensions that you're going to have, plus also how many elements per dimension, right? So for this video, just going to focus on one-dimensional arrays to keep it short, right? So if I wanted to create an array that contained 5 elements, right, I would just put 5 inside of that list. Now, if I wanted to have a multiple element array, or excuse me, a multi-dimensional array, well, then what I would do is I would add additional values in here, for each dimension. So in this case, the first dimension would have 5 elements in it, the second dimension would have 3, the third dimension would have 8, etc., right? But I'm only going to have a one-dimensional array in this video, okay? So once I've done that, this is going to create an array of 5 elements, okay? Now, if I want to use that array, then I'm going to have to assign it to a variable. So I'll call this variable scores, okay? Now, if I was to go ahead and write the scores on the screen, right, this is what we're going to have, right? So let's go ahead and run it. So you can see the output here, nil, 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 nil. Hashtag means that this is the contents of an object, and arrays by default get initialized with all nil, right? Which is Lisp's version of either false or null. Okay, so now what if I want to set some values in that array, right? If I want to access those array elements, put some values into those elements or get the values out. Okay, so what we do is we use setf, and we use the aref function. Now the aref function takes as arguments the name of the array and the index that you want or the index for the element that you want to access, right? So in this case, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to set the 0th element of the scores array to 87, okay? And likewise, I'll set, the other elements. So there's 5 total elements here. So element 1, I'll set to 95. Element 2, I'll set to 77. Element 3, I'll set to 84. And element 4, we'll set to 63. Okay. So now, if I was to write out the contents of the array, right, we would see these updated values. Now, I want to have that output on separate lines, so I'll use the iteratively command here, the iteratively function, and that just moves the cursor to the next line, okay? So let's go ahead and run this, right? So this is before, nil, 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 nil is before, and then 87, 95, 77, 84, 63 is after, right? Now, what if I wanted to access a individual score or an individual element, right? Well, let me move the cursor to the next line again, and then I could just do, write a ref scores. Say I wanted to print 77 on the screen, right? Just do something like this. So this is the aref function. It's saying, in the array scores, give me that 3rd element, and then we'll pass it to write for printing on the screen. Okay, so there's our 77. Okay, now what if we wanted to process the array iteratively? In other words, using a repetition structure, a loop. Well, we could use dotimes to make this happen. And let's say that I wanted to add up the total of all of the scores in that array, right? So I'd want to create a variable called sum, right? And I'm going to initialize it to 0, okay? And then we'll print sum, right? We'll run this. Okay, so let's go ahead and iterate over this array. So make that happen, I'm going to use dotimes, right? And dotimes kind of looks like a function in that you've got this word right here, and you got what looks like to be a parameter list here, but this isn't really a parameter list. This is, what we're going to put in here is we're going to put a variable and an integer, right? So, think about C++, you got for int I equals 0, I less than 5, right? Well, there's the I, and there's the 5, right? So why did I pick 5? Well, because 5 elements, right? So what I need to do for each repetition, for each iteration, is I need to take what's inside of aref scores of I, right? And then I need to add that with sum, right? And then once I've added that with sum, then I need to update sum, right? So just like that. Now let's go ahead and print out our sum to see the result, right? So let's go ahead and test this, right? So you can see there's the total sum for the array, okay? Okay, so what if I wanted to show you the average, right? So then what I would need to do is I would need to divide sum by 5, right? And then maybe I'll assign that to a variable that I'll call avg, okay? And then once I have that, I can print the average. Okay, so let's run that and see what happens. So there's the answer, 406 fifths, right? I mean, that's not wrong, but we probably wanted to see a floating point number, right? So if we're going to do that, then what we have to do is we have to convert that, one of these guys, sum will do, or we could have done 5, convert it to a floating point number, and so that way that'll force floating point division, right? And so now there's your average, 81.2. All right, so how about passing an array to a function and doing something with the array inside the function. Well, let's go ahead and do that. So right now I've got scores. It's got all these values in it right here. But let's say that I wanted a function that would set all of the elements to, say, 99, right? So what could I do? Okay, so what I could do is I could create my function, and I can call this whatever I want. Set elements to 99, I guess. And my parameter list, I'll have a parameter for the array, and then also a parameter for the length of the array. Right? So for this function, I'll make it an iterative function. It won't be recursive. We'll do a recursive function here in a second. But I could use that dotimes again, right? And inside of here, I'll have I for my, my counter variable, like I had before. And then I'll use len here for the number of repetitions I'm going to have, right? So once I've done that, then it's just a matter of updating each one of the elements of the array, right? So set f, aref scores of I, well, not scores, excuse me, a, right? Because we're passing it as an argument, okay? So what do I want to set that to? 99, okay? And that should do it. Okay, so now that I have that function defined, I'll go ahead and call it, right? Set elements to 99, and I'll pass to it as an argument, or as arguments, the scores array and the length of the array, which is 5, okay? And then I'll print scores, okay? And then we'll go ahead and call it. And so now you can see that the scores array is all 99s. So basically what you have here is an example. The way this is behaving is pass by reference, essentially, right? Okay. All right, so let's see an example of a recursive function that processes an array, right? So what I'll do is I'll recursively add up the sum of the array that I'll pass to it. I'll pass the scores array, so that's the only one I have right now. We'll add that up using recursion. And what we'll do is well, let me go and get started. Okay, so we'll define, call this recursive sum, right? In our parameter list, we're going to need one parameter for the array. We'll call that R. And then we'll need another parameter. I'll call it len for the length of the array, right? So when we call this function, we're going to pass it the array and how many elements that it has in it. So what I'm kind of do with this is I'm going to add the array up kind of backwards, right? Because plus doesn't matter. So, if I add up if I add up elements 4 and 3, right? Doesn't matter if I do that or if I add up elements 3 and 4. That order doesn't matter, right? And so by doing this, I can save myself a variable. So I'm going to use len. Initially, it's going to contain the length of the array, but then it's going to become essentially a counter that's going to control how many repetitions we have. Okay, anyway, so initially, I passed 5 as an argument. Well, 5 is not a valid index, so what am I going to do? I'm going to call the decf function, and what that does is that allows you to specify a variable that you want to subtract something from. And I want to subtract 1, right? Because pass 5 initially, subtract 1 from len. Now len's got 4 in it. That's a valid subscript. I can work with that. Okay. So then I'm going to need my decision structure in here. I'm going to use cond, right? Because remember, cond is like a if-else-if type structure. And what I want here is I'm going to have a base case. So if len is less than 0, right? Then I'm out of here, right? There's nothing more for me to do, so I'm just going to return 0, right? So if len is less than 0, I'm out, right? Because if len is serving also as my subscript for doing my traversal of the array, -1 or any negative number is going to be an invalid subscript, right? So I'll just return 0, and then the function will be over. That'll be my base case. Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to need to do something else. And what's that something else? Well, I'm going to have to add the element at index len to the sum of the rest of the array, right? So I'll do this. I'll say aref r, and I'll use len for my index, right? So len's going to be 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, then 0, no problem. So I'll be able to extract the contents of each element, and then I can add that to, and here's my recursive call, the rest of the array. Okay, so that should do it. Let's make sure that our parentheses all match here. I might be missing one. I think I am actually. Right, so I need one more there and one more there. Right, so let's see here. So what am I doing? If this is false, we kick down to here, and then we do our addition, right there. And what are we adding? The contents of the length element of the array, and the sum of the rest of the array. Right, so I think that that's everything that we need there. So let's call recursive sum. We'll pass it scores, and we'll pass it 5 because there's 5 elements, right? And then I will put what's returned by that function into a variable, right, into sum, and then I'll print out your sum for you. Okay, so let's give that a shot and see what happens. See what we got. All right. Oops, made a typo. Recursive sum. Okay, let's try that again. All right, so there we go. So there's our answer, 495, right? 99 times 5 is 495. So 5 100s would be 500. There's a -1 for each one of those hundreds. Subtract 5, 495. Okay, so there's a recursive function that adds up the sum of an array. Okay, now one last thing here, and that is, how can we initialize an array? Okay, so the way we're going to initialize an array is by using this modifier, initial contents. Okay, we're going to use this guy right here, and we're going to include that with our make array function, right? So let's go ahead and I'll just reuse this right here, right? So grab this guy, and I'll use a different array name, right? So we'll call it nums, fine, okay? And so what's going to happen is that we are going to set initial contents, right? And that's going to go after I guess you can call this thing the size declarator, right? I mean, this is going to be how many elements you're going to have in it. So we put initial contents right after that. And see, you'll see in some, if you Google, this for extra supplemental information or whatever, you'll see that a lot of times people in sample code like to put these modifiers on the next line, makes it easier to read. Okay, fine, not a problem with that. So what's going to come after initial contents is going to be a list of the values that you want in each element, right? So I've got 5 elements, and so I'm going to have 5 items in this list, okay? So once I've done that, then I've got an array, 5 elements, and the contents are 8, 6, 7, 5, 3, right? And so let me go ahead and print out nums for you, just so you can see what this thing looks like. Okay, so you can see, there's the contents of the array, 8, 6, 7, 5, 3. Okay, so I think that that's everything that I wanted to cover in the video. So showed you a lot of stuff, how to define an array using the make array function, showed you how to access array elements using a ref. I showed you how to iteratively process an array using dotimes, using a dotimes loop. Showed you how to pass an array to a function, and demonstrated that they're passed by reference. Okay, I also showed you a recursive function for adding up the contents of the array, and I showed you how to initialize an array using the initial contents modifier. Okay, so that's going to bring this video to a close. If you felt that the video was useful, please consider giving the video a thumbs up, and if you thought that the video sucked, well, then you've got that thumbs down button as an option as well. If you'd like to see more videos, if you're interested in more content from the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And as usual, if you're a student of mine and you have further questions, feel free to drop me an email or to stop by my office hours. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.